Hello, everybody. I hope you guys are doing good. It's getting close to the end of the semester, so that should be very exciting, hopefully. We are to the point where we are beginning the urinary system. So in class, we usually draw the kidney and the nephron, but since I'm not seeing all your wonderful faces, we should go ahead and try it this way, right? So I have now posted stuff on YouTube. Woohoo! That's a big step for me. But anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to start out by drawing the kidney. So if you need supplies, pause the video. I'm going to use colored pencils and paper. You can choose to use whatever you'd like. But what we're going to do is we're going to draw a structure that looks kind of like a kidney bean, right? You all have seen kidney beans before, I'm sure. So we've got something going on like that. And then I'm going to start to use some color. Okay, so I would like to try to make my kidney look 3D. And one great thing about this video, right, is if I go faster than you, you can pause it and repeat. I ran out of some space on my phone, so I had to get rid of some stuff before I could actually make this video. So I'm going to have to play with pictures here. But anyway, so what I've drawn right here is to try to make this look 3D. This is going to be an outer capsule, surrounds the entire kidney. And we'll go ahead and draw, and then we'll go in and label after we draw everything. So we've got that. Next, let's go ahead and put in some structures that look like this, but they aren't going to touch. Okay. And then we can go ahead and draw some bases on them. Okay, and then we'll draw some renal papilla at the apex, a little squiggle. Okay. Now what we should do is we're actually going to somewhat connect these like this. So you're going to start here, go there, and then this one's going to be kind of short, and this one I'm going to make longer, and this one short. Okay. And then from the edge over here, we're going to do this. Same thing on this side. Okay, looking good. We're going to draw some vessels. The blood's going to go in through this one, right? Oxygenated blood. And then I'm going to try to make it look like it's branched, going in. And since this one is blue, that means it's deoxygenated blood going to be traveling out. Okay, so now we can go ahead and begin labeling. So we drew this outer fibrous capsule first, right? So you could color that in if you wanted to, but this pink layer right here is called the renal capsule. Okay, so renal capsule. Right, and so this is, the renal capsule is a fibrous capsule that helps to protect the kidney. You may remember from A&P1 that it's made out of dense irregular connective tissue, but it will help to protect the kidney. And then you may remember when we talked about other organs that a lot of times organs have cortexes, which are the outer area, and then medullas, which are the inner region. So this right here, all of this, is going to be the cortex or the renal cortex. And then everything here where you see the green and in between the green, this is all the renal medulla. So I will do something like this, right? So this section right here is going to be the cortex, right? So renal cortex. And then this area right here, right in between and actually part of the green, this right here, so all of this really is going to be the renal medulla. All right, or medulla. So you've got the renal medulla, and we also drew renal papilla, right? So at the apex of each of these pyramids was that renal papilla. Each of these green structures, I'm just going to go ahead and shade this one in, but each of these, right, how many do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Each one of these is called a renal pyramid. And if you watch the video I posted for the lab, you'll see that they are 3D, right? They are shaped like pyramids there. This, right, is just a 2D image for us. But you have renal pyramids, and then these spaces in between the renal pyramids are called renal columns, right? So this space here, right here, right here, these are all renal columns. Right at the apex of the pyramid, we had that renal papilla, right? And there's a tube coming off of it, which is called a minor calyx. So all of these little tubes coming off of the pyramids are called a minor calyx. So over here, I'll just draw that, a minor calyx. Where you have more than one minor calyx coming together, like over here, here's a minor calyx, here's a minor calyx, and then they come together. This area right here is called a major calyx. Okay, so a minor calyx is the branch just coming off of the renal pyramid, but the major calyx is where more than one minor calyx drain together. So then we'll go ahead and we'll pull this over here. Major calyx. Now, we have a minor calyx and a major calyx. More than one calyx is a calyces, if you hear me say that. And they're all going to drain into an area which is known as the renal pelvis. Okay, so all of this in here is going to be the renal pelvis. So the urine will drain through a minor calyx, through a major calyx, into the renal pelvis. And then the renal pelvis will drain then into the ureter. So this long tube here is the ureter. And the ureter will, you have two of them, right? You have two kidneys, two ureters. They will carry the urine down to the bladder, and then when it's time to relieve yourself, to either urinate, or another word for urination is micturition, then the urine would travel out through the urethra. Okay, so to wrap up the anatomy here, this vessel is a renal artery, and then this vessel is a renal vein. And I made a video for you over veins. I made a video over the blood flow through the heart as well. So take some time with that, because you should know the blood flow through the entire kidney. I may have just said through the heart, but blood flow through the kidney is posted in the lab, and you should know all of those structures, right? You should know that whole flow. Your book lays it out nicely for you. If you look in the lab book and in the lecture text and even your notes, you'll see the blood flow. There's a little table that takes you from renal artery through all the vessels and out the renal vein. So take some time with that to get to know that for both lecture and lab. So that is the kidney anatomy, right? So we've got an outer renal capsule. We have a layer out here called the renal cortex, an inner layer called the renal medulla. In the renal medulla, you will find renal pyramids. In between the pyramids, you would find the renal columns. You can also see a minor calyx, a major calyx, right? Minor, minor, major, into the renal pelvis, and then out the ureter. And again, the renal artery and the renal vein. Ooh, one more structure. I almost forgot one. But this area, let's go ahead and use green again. But this area right here, you may remember the hilum from the lungs, right? But the hilum is the area where the vessels are entering and exiting, right? So where blood vessels are going in and out, where the ureter is exiting. So this area right here, it isn't a specific structure. It'd be like a circular area around this portion of the kidney where everything goes in and out. So that is the kidney anatomy that you should take some time to get to know. And then let's go ahead and work on the nephron. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. You guys, you have 2.5 million nephrons in the human body. So one kidney has 1.25 million nephrons. Okay, so the nephrons are what are actually going to make your urine. You have two types of nephrons. You have cortical and juxtamedullary. The cortical nephrons are located primarily in the cortex. They make up 85% of all nephrons. Then your juxtamedullary nephron is located right next to the medulla. Juxtaposed means right next to or near something. So the juxtamedullary nephron is located right next to the medulla. With the cortical and the juxtamedullary, a little bit of their tubule dips down into the medulla to help to draw out water. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. But two different types of nephrons. Most of the nephrons are the cortical, though, and you can look in your notes to see images of both of those. But here we're going to draw a nephron, right? So whether it's cortical or juxtamedullary, it's going to have these same components. So what we'll do is we'll begin over here. We'll draw this. And then when you get over to here, you're going to want to go to the left a little bit to make this side thicker, to make it appear thicker. Draw another squiggly, and then on over here, we're going to make a couple breaks because we need to add some branches, and then again down here. And then we are going to complete our tubule. This is the thin descending limb. And then we're going to draw our thick ascending limb. Okay. There is more than one nephron that actually drains over here. So that's why we draw these branches. And more than one collecting duct can drain into a papillary duct, which we have down here. Okay, so this section is our nephron, and this section is our collecting system. So what we'll do, I'll do a big bracket like this. Whoopsie. Across the entire top. Right, so all of this is going to be the nephron. And what are the two nephrons? Cortical and juxtamedullary, that's right. So this is the nephron. This section over here is called the collecting system. Okay. Our nephron is going to be made out of two main components. This is called the renal corpuscle. And then all of this is called the renal tubule. So what I'll do for that is I'm going to bring this down to the bottom here for space, because I'm going to need to use all my space for this, because I told you I would give you some functions here too, rather than just doing anatomy. The nephron tends to be challenging, so I figured I should give you a little bit more, right, than just my Q&A there. So now let's go ahead and add in a little bit more, right, now that we see how the nephron is broken down a little bit, and how you have nephrons and collecting systems. But what we're going to add, we're going to use red because we're going to draw vessels, right? It doesn't really matter what color you made your nephron and collecting system, but I would use red for your vessel. And so we're going to draw it coming in over here, and then lots of loops. This structure that I'm drawing is kind of like, it's likened to, let's say, a ball of yarn, okay? But it is a specialized capillary network, and this is actually called, this portion inside is called the glomerulus. So let's go ahead and write that up here. Glomerulus. Now this vessel leading in is going to be called the afferent arteriole or afferent arteriole, and the vessel coming out is the efferent arteriole, right? So let's go ahead and write efferent or efferent, right, arteriole. And then over here, blood is going in. This is our afferent or afferent arteriole. The afferent arteriole also has a smooth muscle on it. It can help to regulate blood pressure, right? So if your blood pressure is too high, it can help protect your nephron. But if your blood pressure is too low, it can open up and try to keep the blood filtration and reabsorption taking place. Okay, so something else to add in our drawing. This is going to be a little layer of cells here in orange. And then in green, I am going to draw these little podocytes. And I'll explain them here as soon as we get them on. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and label them. So in orange, right, this orange layer right here is going to be my capsular epithelium. Capsular epithelium. Okay, so we've got capsular epithelium, and then my green is going to be podocytes. Sorry, podocytes. So podocytes are going to be green, and the podocytes are going to be your visceral epithelium. The capsular epithelium is also considered parietal epithelium, but capsular epithelium is a more accurate way of describing it and what your text uses, so we'll stick with that. But your renal corpuscle is going to be made out of two main components. Okay, so the first component is called the glomerular capsule. And this capsule is made out of the orange capsular epithelium and the green visceral epithelium, which is also made out of what type of cell? Right, podocytes. Okay, so the glomerular capsule is also called Bowman's capsule in your notes, but the glomerular capsule is this orange and green layer right here. So you can see visceral and the parietal or capsular epithelium right here. So capsular epithelium is orange, podocytes are green, and together they make up the glomerular capsule. Now, the glomerular capsule and the glomerulus are what make up the renal corpuscle. All right, so two components make up the renal corpuscle. So the renal corpuscle is made out of the glomerular capsule and the glomerulus. And the glomerulus is a capillary network inside of the glomerular capsule. So, main function of the renal corpuscle is going to be filtration. The blood is going to flow through the afferent arteriole, enter into the glomerulus, and be filtered out. What will come out will be water, ions, and organic material, waste products, right? Different acids, right? So all sorts of substances are going to be filtered out to create what's known as filtrate. The filtrate is going to exit out of the renal corpuscle and enter into this structure, which is known as the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, so proximal convoluted, because it's all twisted up, tubule. Also known as the PCT, but you all know you can't abbreviate in answers. But the proximal convoluted tubule, it's proximal, so it's closer to the site of attachment of the corpuscle. Can you guess what this one's called? We'll let you think on that for a minute. Something to add in right here, we should add a vessel, because along the nephron, right, we said that in the renal corpuscle, you will have filtration going on. And then what gets filtered out, some substances will actually be reabsorbed, right? They're going to go back into the blood. And then some substances will be secreted, meaning they travel from the blood back into the tubule. And it will depend on where in the nephron we are as far as what is going to be happening. So first, in the proximal convoluted tubule, the main function here is going to be reabsorption. Substances are going to go back into the blood that the body wants to keep. I heard an analogy on Crash Course that when you clean out the blood, it's kind of like cleaning out your refrigerator, in that you take almost everything out, clean it, and then put back in what you want, right? And so here we're putting back in what we want to keep. Okay, so I don't know if that helps or not, but I thought it was kind of a neat analogy there. But in the proximal convoluted tubule, the main function is going to be reabsorption. I'm just going to put an R for space sake. And you will reabsorb things like water, right? So really I've been writing H2O. So water, ions, and organic material. Okay, so water, ions, and organic material are going to be reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. That's going to be the main function. The filtrate will travel from the proximal convoluted tubule into the loop of Henle, also known as the nephron loop. The loop of Henle is going to have a thin descending limb, which is right here, okay? Thin, I'm going to abbreviate, descending limb. And over here we have the thick ascending limb. All right, and filtrate is flowing up, here, down, there, up. And what we'll do here, I'll go ahead and put some blood vessels on that side. Water is what is going to be reabsorbed. So this is thin, actually, because it's made out of simple squamous epithelial cells to make it easy for water to be reabsorbed, right? You may remember the shorter the distance of diffusion, the faster the rate, right? So this is going to help water diffuse via osmosis, right? You all know that, into the blood vessels. So the thin descending limb is impermeable to solutes, but it is permeable to water. The thick ascending limb is relatively impermeable to water, but it will actively pump out sodium and chloride ions, and it's going to pump it out into the medulla. Okay, the medulla, right? I told you this loop of Henle dips down into the medulla. The juxtamedullary nephrons have longer loops of Henle than the cortical ones. But these loops, whether we're talking about cortical or juxtamedullary, the loop of Henle, or the nephron loop, will dip deep into the medulla. And so when sodium and chloride gets pumped into the medulla, this is only going to increase the osmotic pressure of the medulla, helping your body to then reabsorb more water, right, via osmosis. If there's more solutes in the medulla has a higher osmotic pressure and a greater ability to help draw the water out and into the blood vessels. And when you see in your notes the countercurrent multiplication system, that's what this is all about. Countercurrent because the fluid is flowing or is descending over here, ascending over here. So countercurrent, and multiplication because for all of the sodium and the chloride that you pump out into the medulla, you only amplify and intensify the amount of water that can be reabsorbed out of the thin descending limb. So we have our loop of Henle, right? And then the filtrate is going to flow into this section. Did you guess what it's called? The distal convoluted tubule. Of course you did. And so here is our distal convoluted tubule, also called the DCT. And the distal convoluted tubule is actually going to do mainly secretion. Okay, so substances will be secreted, meaning they will be traveling from the blood into the tubule. So there's more substances that your body wants to get rid of, and it can do that in the distal convoluted tubule. So one of its big functions is secretion. I'll put an S, and it will secrete substances like ions that you maybe don't need, acids, toxins, and drugs. So secretion of these substances will take place in the distal convoluted tubule. You will also get variable reabsorption, and it's variable because it depends on hormones. And variable reabsorption of things like water also sodium and calcium. So, do you remember what hormone is going to cause you to retain more water? Yes, ADH. I'm going to make a little list of some hormones over here. ADH. What is going to cause you to retain more sodium and get rid of potassium? Aldosterone. And what hormones would cause you to reabsorb more calcium to make calcium levels higher? Right, PTH and or parathyroid hormone and calcitriol. Right, so all of those hormones could affect the distal convoluted tubule and cause you to reabsorb more of those substances, depending on the needs of the body. So the filtrate has now traveled through the nephron and it will enter into the collecting system. First, it will travel into what is called the collecting duct. So this first section right here is called the collecting duct. Collecting duct. And in the collecting duct, what's going to happen is you will have variable reabsorption of water dependent on antidiuretic hormone, and you will get either reabsorption or secretion of the following, okay? So sodium and potassium, and the hormone that will affect this, yes, will be aldosterone, but also your pH, right? Your body actually will exchange hydrogen and potassium as well in order to help maintain a balance. But aldosterone can act on the collecting duct and affect sodium levels. And then you also could have reabsorption or secretion of things like hydrogen and bicarbonate. And I'll write out bicarbonate for you. Bicarbonate. Okay, bicarbonate. But you can have reabsorption or secretion of hydrogen and bicarbonate. This is going to regulate your pH. So if you're acidic, if you have a low pH, remember normal pH range, 7.35 to 7.45. So if you're acidic and you have low pH, what do you think you're going to reabsorb? Well, if you're acidic and you have a low pH, you don't want to reabsorb more hydrogen. You want the bicarbonate. This is a buffer. So if you're acidic, your body will reabsorb bicarbonate to help elevate your pH and secrete the hydrogen and help get that out of the body. If the opposite is true, if you're alkaline, if your pH is above 7.45, what's going to happen is you're going to reabsorb the hydrogen to help lower your pH, but you're going to secrete the bicarbonate. You don't need the buffer because you are more alkaline than you possibly should be. So the kidney or the nephron will either reabsorb or secrete hydrogen and bicarbonate depending on your pH. So now urine is almost finished. It's going to then travel through a structure called the papillary duct. And the papillary duct is going to then lead out through the papilla, right, the renal papilla. And then the urine would travel through that renal papilla, excuse me, into the minor calyx. And we'll do this whole flow here in just a moment. Now, the last thing I could say is that the collecting duct is somewhat permeable to a substance called urea. Okay, and urea is going to have the same effect as the sodium and chloride did for the medulla. Urea is typically a waste that your body wants to get rid of, right, a nitrogenous waste, but in this case, it is actually going to keep it in the medulla to increase the osmotic pressure to help you to reabsorb more water, right? So to increase osmotic pressure and increase osmosis. So now our urine has been created and it can travel through the papillary duct into the minor calyx. So now let's go ahead and go through this entire flow before we wrap this up. All right, so the blood is going to flow through the afferent arteriole into the glomerulus where filtration will take place. The blood will be filtered and filtrate will be produced. The filtrate will travel from the renal corpuscle into the renal tubule. The first portion of the renal tubule is the proximal convoluted tubule, where reabsorption of ions, water, and important organic material will take place. The filtrate will travel from the proximal convoluted tubule into the loop of Henle. In the thin descending limb, there will be reabsorption of water. In the thick ascending limb, there will be active transport of both sodium and chloride. The filtrate will travel into the distal convoluted tubule, where you will have secretion of things like ions, acids, drugs, and toxins, and variable reabsorption of things like water, sodium, and calcium, depending on hormones. Once the filtrate then exits out of the nephron, it will enter into the collecting system. It will travel from the distal convoluted tubule into the collecting duct, where hormones like antidiuretic hormone, aldosterone are going to play a role here and affect how much water or sodium is reabsorbed. And then your pH is going to have an effect on how much hydrogen or bicarbonate you keep. Remember, if you are acidic, you will secrete the hydrogen and reabsorb the bicarbonate. But if you are alkaline, you will secrete the bicarbonate and reabsorb the hydrogen. The urine composition is now complete. It will travel through the collecting duct, through the papillary duct, out through the renal papilla into a minor calyx, from a minor calyx into a major calyx, from a major calyx into a renal pelvis, and then from the renal pelvis through the ureter into the bladder, and then out the urethra. So that is the anatomy of the kidney and the nephron. I hope it helps you with the urinary system. I will be posting some more questions for you guys to answer, and you do have a homework assignment over chapter 26 as well. You guys take care, enjoy yourselves here, think positive, and the semester will be over with soon, and things will be back to normal one day here, hopefully in the near future, right? But anyway, you all take care. Thank you. Bye.